Hello and welcome to the current episode of Unboxing Russia. My name is Pradnya Bivalkar, and with Ekaterina Schulmann, we are going to address a very exciting event that just happened in Russia. And very much like us, in sitting in very close proximity, we had Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin sitting next to each other, having a very friendly chat.
And
a lot about it.
Standing next to each other and handing decorations.
Exactly. So to begin with, what is the perception about Mr. Modi's visit within Russia? And then we can talk about what it meant for the Indians and then, dig a little deeper.
With the fragmented nature of Russian information space, there are always three dimensions to looking at any event. Mm-hmm. There's an official version, there's official state media, the things that you hear from the state TV, and there's no other. There's the militarized sector of social media, the so-called Z Telegram channels, the ultra-patriotic ones, and they have, generally, they are supposed to echo the official narrative, but sometimes they have their own diverging opinions.
Sometimes they go rogue.
Yeah, but even when they do echo it, they do it with a vengeance because they're always more Catholic than the Pope, more royalist than the king. And there's the third sector, the oppositional media, which is mostly or almost exclusively situated outside of Russia. And it is also a space where people look at things differently. So this Modi visit, if we start from the official point of view, of course, has been touted as another declaration, another demonstration that Russia is not isolated, that the president of Russia has just shaken hands with one of the leaders of European Union, with the prime minister of Hungary. And now there's a representative of the largest, the most populated country of the global south, the prime minister of India, also coming to have a personal conversation
for 2 days
with the president for 2 days. There was another detail here, which I will ask you about a bit later, because after those 2 days, there came a bit of a surprise. But those 2 days were just brilliant, showy, good TV fodder, brotherly love, etc.
Lots of photo ops.
Absolutely. And of course, the Prime Minister of India was decorated with one of the highest orders of decoration in Russian Federation. So, this was a kind of official narrative. The militarized sector kind of got the idea that really Mr. Modi came to save his own people who are being recruited, or rather being, I would say, scammed into signing themselves, as contract soldiers to the Ministry of Defense. And so he came to buy them
to rescue them,
yes. And also in this sector, there's an idea that since Russia is, in their opinion, kind of leading the global crusade against the unjust world order symbolized by the perfidious Anglo-Saxons and specifically by United States, so the Prime Minister of India kind of came to join this crusade. I don't think crusade is an appropriate term, speaking of non-Christian countries, but still.
And especially the Hindu nationalist credentials.
Absolutely. So let's call it, I don't know, global warfare. And this can be described from their point of view as India allying itself as a representative of the global south with Russia, which of course is the leader of the whole thing.
Of course.
Yeah. So that's another point of view. From the oppositional or anti-war community, we had sad ruminations on the subject of Russia not being isolated enough and of a leader of a sovereign and, I would say, developed country shaking the bloody hand of the dictator who's just ordered the bombing of a children's hospital in Kyiv, which is all very true. On the other hand, surprisingly, I saw quite a few postings and articles saying that whatever his faults, Mr. Modi acted as a father of his people, so he came to save his own, and for their sake, he did shake the bloody hand because
He did what needed to be done.
Yeah, he came to extract from the jaws of death those deluded Indian citizens. So that was the picture. And then came the little surprise, which I wanted to ask you about. The visit was to last 3 days. And it was to be concluded by a gala public presentation, a joint press conference with also additional speeches by the governmental members, the delegation members from India, and members from the government of Russia. And that was canceled, saying that we have already discussed, the presidents have already discussed, President and the Prime Minister, everything that was to be discussed. So there's no point in wasting their time and the public's time, which was kind of surprising and gave rise to various, of course, speculations and suppositions about whose health failed whom, or maybe if they fell out, maybe the brotherly love picture only lasted for 2 days and was not enough to last into the third, or maybe there was some major disagreement, or something happened in India to call him urgently back home. So what were there any versions in the Indian press about it?
So without so I'm not going to go into how many versions of this there are, because I think there can be many to begin with. But what I'm going to try to do is kind of unpack the rhetoric around it. So more than often, especially when it comes to foreign policy, international relations thinking, we ourselves have been trained to look at these relations from in a very binary setting, without. So you say you either go all in or you don't go in. So to put it in concrete terms, so Mr. Modi and his team of ministers, they have been very clear that they want to follow a foreign policy which is in India's interests. So they are not going to lay all their baskets in all eggs in one basket. All baskets in one egg, different story, but all eggs in one basket. So they have been trying to straddle this position for a long time now. And for 2 days, there were a lot of extensive conversations on a variety of MOUs, which we will get to. But you also don't want to overdo it. You've got the job done, the job you went to do, which is get a few important, relevant strategic deals out of it. You had a heart-to-heart bilateral or a series of bilaterals with your brother from another mother, for a lack of better word. And they got it done. So I think there was...
Was it a high-profile delegation on the Indian side?
So Mr. Modi went. So
well, yes, but did he bring many of his men with him?
So you also have to understand,
like ministers,
when Mr. Modi is around, anything else doesn't matter.
Oh,
so if he's there, even the foreign minister, for that matter, would take a backseat in a way. So he was there, and I think I'm thinking...
Is it his first foreign visit after the elections?
Yes, after the re-elections, yes. But he's also been humbled. So you also have to factor that in. So he's not going out in his very usual chest thumping, like, I'm here to claim this space. It's more like, let's talk.
Because of the election results?
Of course. So, they had to mellow down a lot of their rhetoric. They have to kind of make sure that they are seen as acting in India's interests and not acting in particular political interests of a particular party. So, there's a very fine differentiation on that.
Then why did he go to Russia in the first place to play a second fiddle to another autocrat?
No, see, the thing is, India is extremely strategically dependent on Russia right now. Most of the... So Indian army and the armed forces in general are extremely dependent on Russian technology. And they cannot reproduce the technology within India because of intellectual property, patents, and all of that. So which means that they have to make sure that the inflow of technology is either ensured, or they had to convince the Russians to kind of agree to transfer of technology, which they managed. So there are now kind of talks of, doing transfer of technology where India can potentially produce some of the components, some of the equipment that is...
And then it won't be needing Russia that much.
Yeah, but Russia gets something out of it as well. So Russia is hoping to kind of diversify its sources that produce ammunition. Because they, like the war has been going on far longer than they expected it to. And at some point, you're going to have to diversify your sources. So that kind of fits well. So, it's like I give you something, you give me something out of it. So I think beyond the usual brotherly camaraderie that both these men share,
bromance, I think, is the term.
Bromance. Oh, there are so many hashtags. We can just do a whole thing on hashtags. But so I think they got some really concrete things out of it.
And this story with the Indian conscripts, did it get much traction in Indian press? Is it a noticeable story, or is it something on the background?
It is a story, especially because the visit of Mr. Modi to Moscow was something that was a story itself. So of course this was going to get highlighted. It depends on which part of the spectrum you're looking at. So if you're looking like a fairly center-right conversation, then there will be narratives about, him being the fatherly figure, as you said. And it's quite fascinating how the same spectrums, but in different countries, look at the same story from different lenses. So there is this person who's, like the father figure who's going to do the right thing.
So he went to the rescue.
Yeah. Then there were more objective stories that, this is something that needed to be urgently addressed, and it got addressed, and now it's done.
If we look at the Russian side of things, then we should also keep in mind that previously our president, just after his electoral exercise, he went to China on an extremely high-profile visit, taking with him almost the whole of the government, most of the heads of major state corporations and state banks. When I read the list of people going to Beijing, my impression was who's left in to keep the house, because they all went there. And then this visit, this much-touted visit, did not amount to much. It became evident, even in this highly constricted authoritarian information space, that they did not sign any strategic agreement, nor did they in fact sign anything which was worth mentioning, which was worth flying to with a jet after jet of such high profile people. So now, to kind of cover this impression, I think this Indian visit needs to be described to Russian audiences as extremely effective. And there's a problem with that, because, again, not being an economist, even I have heard of the fact that Russia is selling a lot of its oil to India, and it's getting in exchange Indian rupees, which is a non-convertible currency. Can you please explain to a non-economist what does it mean, and why is Indian rupee non-convertible? Does it mean that you can't exchange it for dollars or euros?
Yeah, so it's a slightly multi-layered answer, and 4 factors that kind of hinder this kind of conversion, direct conversion. And it's quite fascinating that you bring it up, because that was in fact one of the key issues that was addressed in this current round of exchanges. But to go back to something that you asked earlier, if this was a high-profile visit, it was high-profile in the sense that there were a lot of decision makers, technocrats or otherwise, who were there for a specific job, and they got the job done. So, ranging from MOUs, going to agreements between National Security Council, National Security Advisors, talking about exchange of technology. So these are actually key issues, independent of how high profile that person is in the hierarchy of things. These were the people who actually have the say to get things done. So they were there. About the ruble-rupee thing. So I think there are a few factors that kind of contribute to it. So when India started, so let's go back 2 steps. India didn't start buying oil from Russia because India wanted to fill in Mr. Putin's coffers to fight the war in Ukraine. India started doing that in its own self-interest. So going back as far as
because it was cheaper now than before the war?
Yes, but also
because Russia doesn't have that many options to whom to sell?
No, but also because India had been asked by the Americans in 2015 to stop purchasing oil from Venezuela. In 2019, they had to kind of go back on buying oil from Iran, to kind of keep those relations alive. So now you're in this conundrum of having to address your economic needs, your energy needs, and then you have a cheap source of oil.
So you need oil, and then you can't get it from one provider after the other because they're all
To
being,
appease the Americans.
So because they're all being sanctioned by United States.
And then at some point you say, hey, I can't keep doing this at your whim. That kind of fits into this whole anti-US narrative. And it depends on how you see it. And that's what I meant earlier, that, we have to stop kind of looking at all the things in a Western or an anti-Western binary, because this is in the interest of India. So that's why they went ahead and did it.
Is India a growing economy? Do you need more and more energy?
Yeah, because we are an extremely young economy. We have been stable in terms of our growth rates between 6 and 7%. And that's,
which is quite good.
Which is quite good. And the challenge will be to sustain that for the next 20 years. But it's a good starting point. So when you've stopped buying oil from sources that you had done business with in the past, then you have to come up with alternatives. And that was the beginning of that conversation. So when you started buying oil from Russia, but your banking systems were extremely intertwined with the Western way of doing banking, which is the SWIFT systems and the rest that goes with it. And
the non-convertibility of rupee means that you protect your internal market from cheap imports.
Yeah, but also because, so when you get a payment in rubles, and you have to route it through an international system, which is sanctioning the ruble, it becomes a challenge. So the payments were made in rupees, and Russia can't process it. So at some point, it was like, it's Russia's problem,
Yes, that's how it's perceived from Russian side. So the picture is that we are selling oil, but
we are getting paid.
But we're not getting paid in real money.
Yeah.
We're getting paid in something which in turn can be exchanged only for Indian goods and products. So like you can buy a lot of tea, which is what I would do. If faced with this dilemma, I would buy the whole Darjeeling region, top and crop. But you can't buy much else.
No. And so parts of it have something to do again with like the second factor, which is India has a huge bilateral trade deficit with Russia.
Meaning that?
So India, so let's put it this way. Historically, India has been kind of purchasing a lot of technology and arms and whatever from Russia. And it has a deficit in terms of the payments that need to be made to Russia. So you don't want to keep adding on to that deficit.
To your existing debt.
So you say, I have made the payment. What you do with it is your thing, which is smart, which is kind of smart. And that's actually something that I would do if I knew that someone is cornered. And I don't want to create the perception that, I am kind of helping that person get richer. I am holding up my part of the deal, which is true. I've made the payments. And if you can't process it, then it's your thing. Like, figure it out.
So what is Russia supposed to do with all those rupees?
They could either purchase things that are produced in India. And that's why I think, is my guess, an educated guess probably, that this is where it could go when it comes to purchasing the ammunition going forward, So then you kind of do that settling of bills rupee to rupee. So you don't have to put any money out of your pocket. So you can just use the funds that you have sitting.
It becomes more like bartering than buying.
In a sense. So
we can exclude currency from this calculation and just do a goods exchange.
In a way.
Which is kind of primitive.
Yeah, but we are not talking about developed people at all.
Fair enough.
We're not talking about civilized people who uphold certain values, especially the brother from another mother, because ours has been humbled in a way. And I think the third factor that is also driving it is the increasing influence of the Chinese yen on the Russian economic system.
And what does it mean to India?
So if you have a lot of countries in the region which are using yen as a preferred currency for trading, that just means that they increasingly become dependent on China, which they anyway are. And that's kind of deterrent to India's own interests in that region. So India wouldn't want to kind of, bolster Russia to go the yen way and say like, hey, why not? Do what the big brother asks you to do. In this way, it's like, listen to what the little brother is telling you. A little, not so little, but...
No, not little at all.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the other factors that drives the conversation.
So it is not perceived in India like Mr. Modi came up to Moscow to join the anti-American League Again, of course, headed by the Russian president.
Depends again. Like, I think if you were to stay objective, regardless of one's own political opinions, I think one could say on a large scale that India is kind of following the whole non-alignment, whatever conversation that it has so far. Right now, it's acting in its own interest, which for certain reasons may appear to be very pandering to Russia and why the West needs to take a stance and, like why they need to kind of give a dressing down to the Indians, saying that this is not done.
Is there an anti-American trend in Indian public discourse? Is it a thing in official rhetoric or in the media?
Not in the official rhetoric, not at all. Or rather, very, very rarely, especially when it comes to foreign policy deliberations.
Yeah, when your leader talks about enemies, who does he mean?
Oh, so our enemies, wow. Okay, we have a lot of internal enemies, and then we have some external enemies. Some of them are Pakistan, of course, you cannot forget them. Then we have China, with its increasing presence in the South China Sea.
So it is also perceived and framed as an opponent.
Yeah, yeah.
Or a threat.
And also as a chance. Because, let's be honest, very few people from the West want to work with China right now. Everyone is talking about China as a threat. Just look around us in Berlin. Any event that's taking place on China is framed in the context of, oh, China as a threat.
Have you been to any such events lately?
Oh, quite a few. In fact, one this morning, one 2 days ago. So, it's fascinating to understand that.
So what's the expert conversation like these days on this subject?
So specifically on China or?
On China, India, Russia triangle.
So the thing is, Russia is extremely entwined right now with China. But Russia is also trying to hedge its chances by saying that, because there are these increasing concerns of Russia becoming a vessel or a vessel yes. of China, like an extended arm of China, and the little player. And Russia doesn't like it.
No one would like it.
And India is concerned that if Russia and China get together on the northern border, it has a big headache. So the best thing is to kind of, and right now it's really dependent on India how deep it wants the relationship to go. Because they have a lot of...
Its relationship with
Russia. Because the India-China relations are like, right now, they have hit one of the lowest points in the past few years. So you can invest or divest depending on how deep you want the relationship to go. And because India has a few more bargaining chips right now than the Russians do, they're trying to play them and they're using them. So to be specific, it's all on these fronts with all the intergovernmental consultation rounds that they have planned. In fact, I was looking it up today, and now they have planned that there will be an intergovernmental commission on military and military technical cooperation, and the second round will be in the second half of 2024. The 21st round, not the second round. The 21st round.
If things go at this rollicking rate, why was the third day of the visit cancelled? Again, we are not going to trade in gossip, but still.
No, because you also have to understand that India needs the West just as much as the West needs India.
So did Mr. Modi suddenly felt that he's been in Moscow long enough?
So if you look at the last 2 days, they did a few photo ops. Enough for good photo ops, but not like all the time in a public space and sitting and talking. Those few rare moments where Mr. Modi criticized the attacks in Ukraine, especially on the hospital where children were killed. And he did say that. He did that very poignantly in Hindi.
Kudos to him.
Yeah, he brought that up very poignantly in Hindi. And then, of course, Mr. Putin was
it translated?
Yeah. Mr. Putin was like, okay, I don't know what this guy is talking about. So, and then you don't want to because from his perspective, again, there was less to celebrate, to have a gala and go all stops out.
Was he scared away by these hospital bombings? Did he suddenly find his situation awkward? Again, I know we are speculating. I understand that neither you nor I have any insider sources on this subject. But
so my speculation in my limited understanding of the topic
educated guess.
Yeah, educated guess.
Highly educated guess.
Like I said, India needs the West just as much as the West needs India. So India has an intergovernmental consultation round coming up with Germany later this year in October. The American elections are going to be quite important for India because the biggest Indian diaspora lives in the United States.
And it's a highly successful one.
And it's a very influential one. So
it's rich and educated.
Exactly. And if the visa, the migration, all these things kind of start changing, then India has a problem. So, like it has to make sure that they're just pushing the boundaries like a 2-year-old, like who's kind of pushing your boundaries, but not just crossing them.
Test them.
Yeah, you're not crossing them just as yet. You're just trying to see what sticks. And these things have stuck. This they can kind of, fairly sell to the partners and say, this is in our interest to get the military technology, to get this and that done. Now they're talking of, some infrastructural exchange of some Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, so I think for trade purpose, because Russia doesn't have a lot of trade partners.
With
right
China,
now.
We call it partnership without limits. Like friendship
for
with
India,
benefits.
It's called special and privileged strategic partnership.
Special and privileged strategic partnership. Also friendship with benefits.
Yeah. Privileged, especially because of arms and technology that goes with it. So
After Mr. Modi has rather suddenly left, and it became known that the Indian unwilling soldiers of India will be set free.
And a few less Ukrainians will be killed.
Yes, and so there was a kind of counter-reaction in the before-mentioned ultra-patriotic sector, saying that, well, the Indians are better off than the Russians because it's a continued sore point for them that have been mobilized in September 2022, 2 years ago, have not been rotated. They have not been let go. Some of them have been on vacation of sorts, but then they came back. And because it's a mobilization situation, they can't sever the contract by their own initiative. So de facto, it's timeless. And then these Telegram channels began saying that there's no one who would plea for the Russians like Modi did for the Indians, because that's what it looks like when you have the leader who really cares. They, of course, are very cautious with saying things like that, but this specific corner of the blogosphere is interesting in its way because, well, many of these people are really new to speaking publicly, so they get carried away. They have not yet been house trained. So sometimes you catch them saying things which are surprising for the informational autocracy that so tightly controls its public sphere. Another thing which strikes me as an interesting question to discuss in relation to this visit is this. Again, the official Russian picture of Putin as a leader of Global South front against the United States, of course, is slightly ridiculous, to put it mildly. But in political science, we have this term authoritarian international, meaning a kind of unholy alliance of autocracies who fraternize with each other and who borrow best practices or worst practices from each other in terms of installing control, stifling dissent, keeping a leash on free media, or controlling electoral results. Because you see time and again when some type of pernicious legislation emerging in one country gets reproduced and copied in other countries as well, which is peculiar because autocracies are generally seen as not prone to forming alliances.
And inward-looking.
Yes, inward-looking, selfish, isolationistic, not values-based. So why should they, as I said, fraternize? Fraternize with each other. They are also seen as more aggressive than democracies, more likely to start an outright aggression against their neighbors, be they democracies or autocracies. But again, right now, there's this very persistent official narrative in Russia of Russia as the leader of the global South. Suddenly Russia is South, which comes kind of as a geographical surprise.
But that anyway it holds true for a lot of countries because Australia is in the global North.
And Japan?
Also.
tricky, isn't it?
A conversation for its own.
Yes, we need to devote a space to discussing this. So, when we talk about legislation, a subject close to my heart, for example, you have foreign agent legislation, which started in United States in 1938 as the famous FARA law, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And then it was heavily amended in 1964, 62 to 64, losing its anti-Nazi and wartime trend. And now FARA no longer concerns NGOs, but it concerns commercial entities, commercial media, and lobbying and consulting bodies. Then, starting the beginning of the 10th years of this century, other countries started adopting foreign agent legislation of their own. Russia was one of the first. We started doing this in 2012. The new law came into effect in 2013. But
so what? Just to interfere you a little bit. What are the markers that make you a foreign agent or not? You know, like, are there like specific things that one needs to tick the boxes and say, oh yes, this person, of course, a foreign agent?
Well,
or it's very ambiguous in terms of legislation.
I can make it personal and speak about myself. But,
I didn't want to say it, but you said it yourself.
But first, I think we need to generalize this whole thing. I suspect that more countries began adopting this type of legislation in this specific historical period because the nation states began to feel threatened by international networks of NGOs, by international media, generally by the forces of globalization. And they started calling it foreign interference.
But so in that case, it will be predominantly Western. Because, you know, those guys had the, independent of their rhetoric, they had the means, they had the money to go and invest and, you know, like build up TV stations, build up offices.
Or fund NGOs.
Exactly.
The evil man of Russian propaganda is, of course, George Soros, the immortal.
Of course.
He's supposed to have spoiled the whole generation or a couple of them with his perfidious history textbooks, funding libraries, the bad guy, generally sponsoring humanities in Russia. So that was framed as bad and evil foreign interference. But democratic countries like Canada and Australia adopted their laws, as they said, based on the American FARA, also about the same period. These are very different types of legislation. Okay. You can become a physical person foreign agent in Canada or in Australia like you can in Russia. In Russia, according to the current version of the law, you don't even have to receive foreign funding. You have to be under foreign influence, which means whatever. Of course, if you know a foreign language or have read a foreign book, even in translation, then perhaps you come under a foreign influence as well. But in post-Soviet space, Russian legislation has been extensively copied. For example, there's a story that has attracted much attention about the adoption of the stormy adoption of this law in Georgia. The ruling party, the majority party in Georgian parliament is seen as perceived as pro-Russian. And the bill that they have adopted, and they have overcome the presidential veto in Georgia, they have also ignored mass and persistent protests of the Georgian people, and they have adopted this very much Russian-style legislation. But it's in Russian style of the early 10th years, so, not the final version.
If I might ask you at this point. So you said foreign influence, but foreign influence amounting to what? So I remember, I think a few days ago, not far ago, was this ruling that came out against these two women who are theater personalities in Russia.
Evgenia Berkovich and Svetlana Pedrichuk.
So apparently,
one of them is a playwright. Another set up a play, and the tragic irony is that in 2022, this play received 2 awards,
Prizes,
the Golden Mask Awards, which is the most prestigious theatrical award in the country. And 2 years ago, they each got 6 years of penal colony for approving of terrorism.
But from what I understand, they have not been declared foreign agents as yet.
No, they have not.
So that's what I meant, So foreign influence on them, apparently. But amounting to what? To like spying activities, to...
Spying is a different article of the criminal code, but Russian-style foreign agentry means that you combine in your one person 2 things, 2 factors. You do some sort of political activity, which includes publicly speaking about governmental or state decisions, expressing your opinion. So when I was suing the Minister of Justice for my particular case, I was provided with proofs on their side of why am I a foreign agent. It was a curious picture. It was a curious paper to read. It said quite respectfully that I'm a Russian political scientist, a candidate of political science, which is all quite true.
Profile.
Absolutely. And I'm a specialist in legislative process, which is true. And I speak about it in public.
So you tick all the right boxes.
I can't deny it. I absolutely do. And I will continue doing this whenever
possible. But you were
possible.
not under foreign influence.
And at the same time, I'm under foreign influence.
Why?
Why? Because I was conducting this weekly program on a radio station, and this radio station was receiving foreign funding. And since I'm receiving honorariums from them, that's indirect foreign funding. There was also my YouTube channel, which is monetized by Google Ireland. Yes, by Ireland. So I'm under Irish foreign influence. The beauty of the Russian law is that there needs to be no connection between the funding or the influence and my activity. So they don't try to prove that I'm getting paid by Ireland to denigrate Russian laws in public. I just speak about political things, and at the same time, in some other corner of my universe, I receive this foreign funding, or I get under foreign influence.
So you could have been selling vegetables and getting funding from...
Absolutely. Some people have been...
a foreign agent.
have been declared foreign agents because they had, for example, rented a room to a tourist and received money from abroad. That is also foreign influence. But my point is not, again, repeating this sad story of my personal foreign agency, but asking ourselves in the conclusion of this discussion, you see, isolating oneself from foreign influence seems to be a properly autocratic thing. And yes, many authoritarian countries or countries experiencing authoritarian tendencies have adopted this legislation. In European Union, there has been a discussion of such a law, but thankfully, Russia has made such an example of it that now these very words arouse negative reactions. So the issue has been put on hold, and I hope for good. I'm very much aware of pernicious attempts of Russia to influence other countries' citizens by using their toxic TV sets, but I think more harm will be done by trying to regulate this sphere. It's much better and I think more fair and honest to just turn off
the TV,
the broadcasting, rather than, what the Russian lesson in this respect really is. It's not that there is no such thing as a foreign power trying to get into your political machine. It may very well happen, but the harm of trying to legislate it is more than the good that you may do, because you will, in 3 simple steps, you will end up terrorizing not foreigners, but your own citizens.
Isn't it ironical that exactly the things that Russia claims, or the Russian legislation, from what I understand, is actually the things that Russia ends up doing in other countries, by kind of meddling.
I think our brothers, the psychologists, call it projection.
Yeah.
When you do things which are not very good things to do, you sort of suspect everyone of doing the same. And it's interesting, coming back to our initial topic, to friendships with benefits and authoritarian alliances, how there have been recently in Russia more and more cases of people tried for state treason and espionage. And one of the most numerous groups of, spies that have been convicted for spying in the for China. So I don't know about spies for India. I hope there won't be any of them.
Especially under the current circumstances, not so much.
But one would think that with our friendship without limits with China, you wouldn't have so many scientists convicted for participating in conferences with the Chinese. And then a few years later, FSB comes after them and tells them that they have sold state secrets or publicized state secrets. So I think sold them to the Chinese.
India was showing some signs of going down that way, especially when it comes to like banning NGOs or making it hard for them to work to continue their funding. But thankfully, like I said, through the extremely brilliant humbling exercise that just happened a few weeks ago in India,
you see the advantage of electoral democracy, or at least some elements of it.
It brings some surprises, not always, but sometimes, and this time was one of those. So
this may have resulted in making your leader a little bit more modest, which is for the benefit of the country. Unfortunately, we can't do any such humbling exercise in Russia.
Maybe he will pass on some of the gloominess to your leader, and I hope that he learns something out of it.
Well,
that you can't take a public that's not saying anything for granted because they're not saying anything right now doesn't mean that they would never say anything.
The next stage of development of Russian electoral system is now having to do without even paper bulletins on elections. So it's all going to be electronic during the next elections in Moscow City Duma. So it's an electoral exercise that leaves no traces. Now there will be no connection whatsoever between what the electorate does or does not, whether they even turn up or stay at home, because they will be just shown the necessary results, which is, let's say in conclusion, a dangerous exercise. When you think you have controlled everything, you may actually have undermined your own legitimacy base. And that's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, but to turn it a little bit into hope, especially when you start thinking you've controlled everything, you are caught unaware.
So maybe your leader will yet thank his stars for a system that allows him to be taken down a peg or two.
I don't think he's thanking the stars, but we are.
Yes, you definitely should. Maybe in the long run, he will too.
Yeah.
Because having a working electoral machine is, in the end, to the advantage of everyone. And with this highly democratic thesis, I think we can conclude our conversation on the brotherhood of autocracies.
And on the sisterhood of India and
Experts.
Russia.
Yes.
All right.
We hope to get back to this in 2 weeks' time.
Roughly, yeah.
All right. And discuss whatever comes uppermost.
And let us know what you think of the brotherly, sisterly relations that we spoke about today.
Can autocracies do alliances, or are they just self-interested and self-centered?
Thank you so
very much for your attention.
That was a fun conversation.